One of the things we always talk about is that there's a real difference between sitting and listening to me talk about something and getting in there and coding it yourself, or at least following along with me while I code it. So let's do an example as we go from static or absolute measurements to something that's more fluid. So what I have here is a site where I've used absolute measurements to lay everything out. I have a large screen and I have 3 columns. I'll check out the HTML quickly just so we can all follow along. I've got my header right here. Not much in it other than H1 and an H2 element. I have a nice little paragraph over here where I basically say, I've hard-coded these measurements. What's going to happen when I resize the screen? And then the last thing I have is really just a little bit of craziness. I'm going to pull it down here. It's just 3 divs, each of which has an H2 header and a paragraph. They all say the same thing. It's just some Latin filler because I don't really care about the actual content itself. More importantly, let's look over here at the CSS. In that main section, the main content of my page, I've gone in and I've hard-coded the value to 980 pixels. The margin 0 auto just means, hey, make sure you center me if I'm on a bigger browser. For each column, because I'm going to have 3, I set the width to 300. Now, 300, 300, 300, that's only 900 pixels. But because I leave some margin in between each column, it's important we add a little bit of extra padding there. Everything else is fairly straightforward. I have rules for the body and the H1 and the H2. The only other real measurements I use are the fact that I've set my font size to 13 pixel, and down here for the H1, I've set my font size to 64 pixels. All right, let's take a look at this page when I really bring the content up so it's something we can see. Here we go. I have it. I have a fairly large size screen. In fact, if I pull it around, I can usually see how big it is. And it looks okay. But as I make the screen smaller, you're going to see that what happens is the content is hidden. If I scroll, I can't even scroll up and down. I'm trying. The only way for me to see more content is to scroll horizontally. And we all know that I absolutely hate that. In addition, this H1, the fluid measurement, the font is so big that it kind of overshadows the rest of the content. So I'm going to make this big again, and let's think about what we want to do. One of the keys to responsive design typically is mapping out what you want your page to look like before you code it. And we're going to talk about that in week 2. But right here, for week 1, let's just wing it a little bit. I'm going to make it so I can see my code. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first place I hard-coded a value, which is the width of this main part. Saying that I always want it to be 980 pixels, it's just a mistake. Instead, let's use percent here and say, I want this to take up, let's say, somewhere between 95, I'll pick 95% of my page. Already, you could see that things happened in there. Not everything we want to happen, but a little. I'll resize it again. You can see that my paragraph down here still fits, but the columns just look a little bit awkward, particularly if I'm somewhere in that awkward range of 2 columns fit, but not the third. So while the main page is responsive, let's work on those columns. Here, I've set them to 300 pixels. Let's change that. Since I have 3 columns, again, I could set it to 33, 33, 33, but I'm probably going to end up with some overlap. So I'm going to make these 30%, and I'm going to set the margin left to, we'll use 2%. Now you can already see this is a huge difference in our page. Whether I make it big, there's not a lot of wasted white space along the side, and if I make it small, the columns are still together. This is really good. The last thing I'm going to change, I'm going to go ahead and change my H1 so I'm using the M instead. Or sorry, actually the percent instead. We'll go ahead and make this 125%. That's not big enough. I'll make it 300%. That'll be big. Okay. I'm going to save this. I'm going to resize. And when you go in, it no longer will be quite as dramatic over the entire page. All right, so this was a fairly straightforward example of how we can take absolute measurements and change them to use something that's relative or responsive to make our page a little bit better. This is just the first step, but it's an important step, and it's something I want you to play with so you can feel like you're beginning to understand percents, ems, and other things like that. Good luck. Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about media queries. Media queries are going to allow us to adjust the style of our web pages depending upon the properties of the media that we're looking at. So we can look at the browser size, width, and other things to decide the best way to lay out our content. This all started with CSS 2.1. It allowed us to use different media types. So inside your HTML, you could have multiple links to different style sheets, but it wouldn't apply all the style sheets, just some of them. So here's an example. Right here, the style sheet style.css is only going to apply when the content is being displayed on a screen. And for many of you, that's the only way you really know of content being displayed. But for those of us who are older, or just plain old, we remember a time when on your computer you might want to print out directions someplace. And so when you printed out the directions, you had the option to turn on or off the pictures and other things like that. So for us, when it came time to actually print out the directions, the computer would recognize that we're trying to print them out and use a completely different style sheet. And this was a big step forward for us because it allowed us to, again, have different content and style depending upon the platform. With CSS3, we have even more capabilities because the style can depend upon many more features. We can look at the width, the height, the orientation, and even the screen resolution. In addition, we can add Boolean operators to increase the power. And what Boolean operators are just simple and ors. So you might want to say something along the line of, if it's a screen and fill in some other properties there. So let's look at some examples. Every media query has two components. The first is the media type. We often think of this as something along the lines of, will this be a screen? Is it a printout? You might even think about Braille, or if it's going out to a TV. We can also use the word all to trigger every possible media type that could possibly come up. The second component is the actual query of the media feature and the trigger size that we want to be looking for. So for example, we might be looking for very specific width, height, orientation, or resolution. Here's an example for you right here. The media type that I want to talk about is screen. The CSS will only apply if we're looking at a screen. But in addition, we also want to make sure that that screen has a maximum width of 480 pixels and a resolution of 163 dpi. So that's a lot of circling and that's a lot of new words. But that's what we're going to talk about for the next few slides to help you really get this idea of how every query has a media type and then some sort of trigger size and media feature. There are three ways to implement media queries. The first is to use the import rule. Inside your CSS, you would use import. You'd include the URL for the style sheet that you want to import, as well as the different size and conditions on when you want to import it. So in this case, if my screen has a minimum width of 600 pixels, we would want to use smallstyle.css. The second approach is to put the media query directly in the style sheet itself. So we would have, before any of our rules, we'd have the @media screen and min width 500 pixels. And then inside here, we would put all of our usual CSS rules for the color, the font, the size, different things like that. So it's all contained inside a single file. The third approach is to include the query in the actual link in the header of your HTML. So here, instead of just saying link this style sheet, we've included the trigger and the different rules right inside our HTML link tag. In general, I'm going to always stick to this second approach right here. This is the one that I personally use for doing my responsive design. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't feel free to play with all three of these different approaches. So let's review for just a second to make sure that we're on the same page with how we implement media queries. In this case, I've put my media queries directly into my CSS file. And what's going to happen is, as always, CSS starts from the top and works its way down. We're going to hit that first rule right here that's going to check and say, hey, I need to see if my display is an actual screen, not a printout or something like that. If it is, and the screen width is at least 500 pixels, then I want to apply these specific rules right here. But I don't stop. Because this is the CSS, it'll continue to work its way down and check and say, hey, am I at least 900 pixels? If I am, I'm going to apply these rules too. So it gets tricky at first when you're first learning how to do responsive design. We're going to do one together to get your hands wet and have you coding. Just make sure that you start small, and we'll go ahead and we'll do something together. Good luck. Hey everybody, welcome back. Let's go look at some code together. What we're looking at here is an example from when we first learned about fluid measurements. We went in and we switched our absolute measurements of pixels and started using percents. And it works out really well, unless you take it and you look at a small screen. Right now, the 3 columns is fine. But when we get smaller, right here, it really doesn't make sense to try to shove 3 columns worth of content into such a small screen. This is where the idea of mobile first really comes in. What I think would be a much better look is to have each column stacked on top of each other and only go to 3 columns when you're on a large screen. So let's take a look at how we can make that change together. The first thing that we need to look at is what these columns are. And what we have is we have 3 divs, each of type class equals column. The nice thing about divs is that by default, they're block. If we don't do anything at all, they're going to be stacked just the way we want them to be. So let's find our code right here. You can see that I went in and I said, I only want them to be 30% and inline block. I floated them and all that great stuff there. The truth is, when we think mobile first, we shouldn't be changing anything at all in the column. So I'm going to take this code and I'm going to delete it. All right, I've done it. They're block. And on the large screen, it looks really silly. But on the smaller screen, we have that success I was looking for. We have our mobile first view. Now the question is, how do we go from a single column to 3 columns as we get bigger? And the answer is to use media queries. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of my CSS, and I need to add some code. How do we make a media query? Don't forget, it's all about putting in that type and that breakpoint. So I'm going to put in @media screen and min width. Let's go ahead and just pick a number. I'm going to say 778. All right. Make this a little bigger so you can see it. So what I'm saying, oops, and it should definitely be pixels, not PS. What I'm saying is, hey, browser, if you are this size or bigger, I want you to run some special code. And what code is it? It's that code that says, oh, never mind, I don't want to be single column, I want to be 3 column. So I'm going to put that back in here. Save it, and boom, it happened already. It goes in, the browser figures out your size, and then goes in and makes any changes. This is hopefully pretty straightforward to you, although you might want to look at the code for a little bit, change the numbers. I'm going to change this to 1200 right away it goes back. You can play with these breakpoints. These are the breakpoints that we talked about earlier to find that perfect look for your page. As we make more and more complicated media queries, I really want you to go back and make sure you understand these simple ones first. Good luck. Hi, today we're going to talk about wireframes. And as we talk about them, I have to admit, the way in which I teach web design doesn't really mimic the way you should really do it in the real world, and that I tend to talk about the coding aspects first, the things you can do to create something real right away. But this lecture should have really come earlier in the course, because your layout is one of the first things you should think about. So if you're going off to be a web designer, you're going to need to realize that coding comes after your design. And wireframes provide a visual representation of your layout. This is what you're going to use when you decide it's time to start coding. So what do I mean by a wireframe? Let me show you a few examples. Right here, I'm at a site called wireframeshowcase.com. And if you scroll through the page, kind of up and down, you can see that you see a little bit of a few different pages, real pages, but also you see some graphical sketches underneath them. So let's go back up to the first one. Up here, I'm going to go ahead and go in and kind of show you what it means when we click on the View Details. When I hover over the page, you can see what the site's going to look like when it's set out on the screen. But when I've come off just a little bit, you can see that all those visual representations are actually based on very plain, very unstyled little documents. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, before you can start drawing, you need to decide what you need to have on your page. This includes both text and graphics. If it really needs to be there, you need to know at the beginning. What is going to be the best layout for this material? Once you know what you need to have, you can start thinking about different things such as, oh, well, on a mobile view, we might want a different type of navigation bar. We want all the same material, just a different layout. When we're on a laptop view, you might decide you want to add a little bit of extras, but first you need to figure out how you're going to lay out those necessities. Again, as always, I'm going to remind you that the mobile view is the most important view in web design. If you don't think about the mobile view first, it's very simple for you to start coming up with a clear idea and then as you shrink it down, throwing things out. No, at the beginning you decided this was important. So if it is important, make sure you design it for that mobile view. Let's give an example. You might know that you want to have a header, a section. Inside that section, you're going to have an article and maybe an aside, and you're also going to have a footer. Because you're on a mobile view, things tend to go right from the top down to the bottom, and very few things side to side. We just don't have the space. Once you've decided on that mobile view and you've sketched it out, you can go on to what you might want it to look like on the larger view. In this case, the header and the footer are the same, but we have more flexibility with where we want to put that other content. You also want to think about functionality when you're doing your wireframes. The design should be about more than just the layout. You can use these wireframes to test out the interaction that your page might go through as well. Navigation, form inputs, different things like that. If you don't think about that at the beginning, you run into a lot more problems when it's time to code. Did you want it to be a drop-down menu, a hover actions? We need to think about this functionality from the beginning. Many people refer to sketches and wireframes and kind of wonder what the difference is. I always recommend starting with a sketch. With this idea with the sketch is that you're just kind of drawing with your hand and it's very free form. One of the reasons to do this is that I know when someone hands me a very nicely typed paper or some nice computer printout, I'm more hesitant to give back feedback. While if you give me a nice kind of hand-drawn piece of paper, you can really dive into it and say, oh no, what if you do this? And you don't mind marking up their stuff as much. So when you do a sketch, when you do it by hand, you get less, I would say, attached to it. You're more likely to be willing to make changes because you didn't spend 5 hours getting the perfect border or putting things in just the right spot. All right? So let's take a look at another place where I'm not going to cover myself, but there are places where you can figure out these kind of best design practices as you start sketching out your page and eventually moving on. One of the reasons I like this site is, well, because I agree with many of the things they're talking about and they agree with me. But as you look around, you're going to see that most articles talk about best practices. These aren't rules, these are just ideas and suggestions for you to think about. So, for instance, one suggestion is don't use color. Again, this goes back to the idea that wireframes and sketches are about content. It's about figuring out how you want to lay it out and use it. Once you start throwing in color, things start taking on more meaning when maybe they weren't supposed to. You want to be very consistent when you're doing your sign. Don't worry about other things such as padding and spacing and certain little elements that might be different on a single page. Think about your overlying sketch. The next one is always a problem for people because when you're designing, you actually tend to get really into it. It's important that you use actual content in your page because when you do this, it really helps you visually look at the page and realize, oh, this part's getting lost, or oh, this section is really too big. Maybe I should be breaking it up into more sections. This last one I'm going to talk about, and then you can kind of view the page alone if you'd like, is this idea that you never wire alone. This, I hope, is an underlying concept you're getting from all of the courses that you're taking with me. It's never good to code alone, design alone. It should really be a give and take as much as possible. As we're together starting off this class, or even as you're ending it up, it can be really difficult to come up with sketches because we tend to make really small pages because we're just getting started. Plus, we don't have official clients who are giving us feedback. We really only have maybe your friends and family, and if you get on the message board and show people your sketches. So don't be discouraged or feel like you're doing something wrong if you have a hard time coming up with sketches at the beginning. The other challenge I find that when you're doing something like this is you really want to keep things simple and changeable. Like I said, it's really impressive to give somebody a printout with everything you've placed, but it's not always the best way to get feedback. Also, it sometimes feels like, oh, I can do so much more. Simple design is always going to be the best design. The other thing I'd really like to just mention to you is that if design is where you're at, this is the part you've really taken this course for, it's still important to understand the basics of coding. That's going to help you understand how you can convey your ideas to the programmers and let them make something really great out of your design. Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about something called breakpoints. So when we talk about responsive design, people often talk about breakpoints. Oh, what breakpoint should I use? So what they're talking about is this idea that people will pick certain screen sizes and say, at this screen size and smaller, I want my page to look one way, but at a different screen size, I want it to look another way, etc. And so those screen sizes are what we call the breakpoints. We use them to try to kind of come up with the best possible user experience based on the screen size, the accessibility settings, etc. But breakpoints are usually talking about screen size. What you'll hear is you'll hear people say, I want to trigger a new view at this breakpoint. And what they mean by trigger is they mean every time I hit another size, give me another look. Now, to be honest, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, all right? Because most people, when they open up their laptop, definitely when they open up their phone, they're not resizing the window, right? But what you might do is think about when you're on your phone and you're looking at it and it's maybe too small or doesn't look quite right, you might turn it, right? So at first you're at portrait mode and now you're on landscape mode. That's what they mean. When you do that, you should be triggering a new look. So I will use breakpoints to refer to which rules are applied at each screen size, meaning when they should be triggered. So how do people determine breakpoints? Well, it used to be the case that we would choose our breakpoints based on the most common device sizes. And this was simple not that long ago because there really weren't that many devices. But as we know now, new phones, new tablets, new tech comes out all the time. And everything's always a slightly different size. One year it's cool to be small, another year it's cool to have the biggest screen you can possibly carry around. So often you might want to determine your breakpoints based on your content because you never know what the size will be. So as you design, you'll start small, kind of like, I'm looking at my content, I'm looking at a small screen, looks good. And then you'll make your screen bigger and bigger till you reach a point where you're like, I think my content is dictating that this should be a breakpoint. So again, you're triggering your breakpoints based on your content, not the imaginary device that someone may or may not be using. So as I mentioned, it can be, even though I said you should test it based on your content, there are common breakpoints, and when I show you inspect element, you're going to see some of them. So let's take a second and look. So here I am at the University of Michigan homepage. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the screen, and you will see that my inspect element pops up over here, right? And this is where I can see all the different HTML code. I can see the CSS code. You can really see everything. If you look very carefully in your inspect element, up in the upper left corner, there's something that says toggle device toolbar. All right, and I'm going to click on this. And when I do, you can see that now the page definitely looks much different. What this toggle device does is it gives you the option to see this page on different screen sizes. So right now it's kind of hard-coded to 400 pixels by 993, but I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller. And when I make it smaller, you'll notice that the navigation is different. Now I'm going to go back up here again to where it says responsive. I'm going to click on it, and you will see that it has provided some common screen sizes for you. So I can see what this page would look like on an iPhone XR, or if I wanted to see it on an iPad mini. I could look at it on I've never seen a Galaxy Fold, so this is what it would look like on a Galaxy Fold. And now I'm going to click right here. I can't even describe what this is. It looks like something being shook a little bit. It says screen orientation. And here I can look at what it would look like if I turned my tablet kind of back and forth. So inspect element does give some opportunities to look at the most common screen sizes. Regardless of the number of breakpoints that you decide to handle, the most important rule of web design, and I'll say this again, it's going to be on the quiz. The most important concept of responsive web design is that everything should be mobile first. What does mobile first mean? Well, when you're designing your page, imagine that everyone is looking at it from the smallest phone possible, right? The smallest screen possible. You shouldn't see any breakpoints for this, right? So the default styling will cover exactly what you want it to look like. Eventually, as we start adding more code and we start adding media queries, you're going to be having rules that say, oh, when the screen is at this minimum width, here's the new style I want to apply. All right, we want to use min width because otherwise you're kind of saying, oh, well, max width, it kind of implies that you were designing large screen first. So when you go out onto the web and you go to take other people's code, you're going to see a lot of max width, but that's not designing mobile first. It's also important to think beyond viewport sizes. Responsive is designed on more than just your screen size. It can depend upon your orientation, your screen resolution, right? You can have better, more high definition pixels displayed on a high resolution screen and go with lower quality pictures if you know the resolution is small. We definitely want to address people's accessibility preferences. There's something called prefers reduced motion that I personally use all the time because it helps me from getting a little bit dizzy when things are flashing on the screen. You will also see that a lot of people have different device preferences. There's all these different color schemes or battery modes that people turn on and off all the time. Have you ever noticed that your page looks a little different when you do that? It really should. In the next few videos, we're going to be practicing just these concepts, creating media queries based on different breakpoints and creating media queries based on these different preferences. It'll take some time. You're going to mess up. You're going to need to practice, practice, practice. But after a while, you're going to be able to make some really cool things that I hope you'll be proud of. Today's lecture is about media queries. And yes, I've already given you a lecture on media queries, but I really want to give you another one because media queries are something that it's much easier watching me do it than doing it yourself. So today, 3 simple steps that I want you to try your best to follow, and then we'll look at an example. The key to understanding media queries is to actually use them in responsive design. This lecture is going to describe the process in 3 steps, but you won't necessarily need to use all of them. So best I can do is give you guidelines. Step 1. This is something that will cause your page to work or not work many times on mobile phones. It's a simple bit of code that you want to include in the head of your HTML. What we have here is a meta tag. And what it's going to do is it's going to convey this information to your browser that based on, we're going to be using different viewports. And it wants the browser to let your style sheets know, hey, how big you are. You're always going to leave the code exactly like this. You're simply saying, I want to know the viewport. I want to know the content width. This initial scale equals 1, that basically just kind of sets what your size is going to be. Now, if you've ever been to a site where things are really small and you want to make it bigger so you can read it a little better and it just won't let you do that, that is because somebody has put this very horrible, horrible piece of code into their HTML. Instead of saying just initial scale equals 1, it also has maximum scale equals 1. I mention this not because I want you to put it into your site, but because it's pretty common practice when you're first coding to use other people's code. So if you see this happening, you want to take it out. It's just a really bad experience for many people trying to use your page if they can't make things bigger or smaller. So that's step 1. It's not only going to help your browser know that you're going to be doing responsive design, it may actually help your search engine optimization as well. In step 2, I really want to encourage you to use fluid layouts. It's very often the case that when people use breakpoints, they then use absolute measurements. The reason for that is, if you think about it, they know pretty much how big the screen's going to be. They know that it's going to be somewhere between here, that size, and that size. Based on the fact that they know how many pixels wide the screen is going to be, they can hard code the width of some of their elements. You're going to see this in Bootstrap all the time. But just because somebody else does it doesn't mean that you should. I want you to use those other things such as percentages and ems. These are really great fluid measurements. Percentages you tend to use more on elements such as images and divs. Ems are a measurement of typography. So 1 em is the width of 1 letter M. If you're not sure, you don't remember that, don't forget to go back and look at some of the fluid measurement videos. I also hear that Bootstrap 4, one of the platforms we're going to use, is going to switch over to ems and rems too. The last thing I'd just like to remind people is that when you use these fluid measurements for things like padding and margin, the percents are affected by the width, not the height of your page. What does that mean? It means if your page is this big, I'm going to switch to the pen there, the padding is affected by how wide it is. So 50% padding would pretty much give you something like this. If you make the page wider, then you would get more padding. However, if you make the page the same but you make it taller, the height doesn't affect it at all. So it doesn't seem like a big deal until you're stuck trying to code it. Just remember, paddings and margins, when you use percent, they're affected by the width of the page, not the height. That third step is really the biggest step, and that is including those media queries. The fluid layout is triggered by these certain breakpoints that you want to use. Design for that smaller screen and work bigger. Some sites like to strip out information or even just set it to display none when the site is small because they think, oh, that's not really important information. Well, that's kind of you deciding for other people what they might want to see. It drives me crazy when I go to a site and I have to click on a link to go to large size view, or when it just won't let me access information at all. You don't want to penalize your mobile users. You also need to realize that just because you set something to hidden or display none, the content might still be downloaded. And this can affect performance. They're still downloading big things like pictures and you're eating up their data. So think small screen and grow bigger. When you put in these media queries, it's common to have a few different sets of rules. You might have your large screen, and then a medium screen, and then, oh, here's my default mobile view. I want you to look at this, and if you need to, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to see if you can figure out why this is bad code. All right, did you see it? Let's see. I added one additional rule here. I just added in some size. But if you notice, as I resize this window, nothing happens. Nothing is getting triggered. Why is that? Well, it's because I haven't ordered things correctly. Style sheets always start from the top and work their way down. All right, so the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check and say, do I have a minimum width of 1024 pixels? If you do, great. It's going to apply the background blue and the width of 25%. But here's the problem. If you have a minimum width of 1024 pixels right there, that means you also have a minimum width of 780. If it's going to happen when it's big, it's going to happen when it's smaller. So this rule overwrites the one above it. And then down here, this one, it's not even inside a rule. You're basically saying, always apply this styling. So our rules are syntactically correct. This is a valid piece of code. It's the logic that we need to fix. Let's start by doing this. I'm going to take that default rule and I'm going to move it up to the top. And as soon as I do that, let's see what happens. Well, one, you can see that it's now yellow. So we know that it's at least 780 pixels. But when I look at it, you can usually see it's actually 1800 pixels. So I would expect it to be blue. Oh, but it is working on the small view, so that's good. So we have 2 out of the 3 views. Well, that problem still exists that the order isn't correct. When you're triggering on minimum width, you want to make sure you're always testing for your smallest sizes first. Save this, and now we have, I'm hoping it'll go from green to yellow to blue. As you can see, I still added fluid measurements because as the size of the screen grows, so does my H1 because I set it to 25%. These are the type of things that it's really simple to nod along, say, yep, I got it. And it isn't until you write your own code that you're going to accidentally make these mistakes and not know what's going on. My advice to you is to always add one media query at a time and make it something simple. Put in that media query, add a rule, test it, build from there. Add a new media query, add a rule, test it. It's the best way to make sure that your code's going to be clean. And with that, I'm pretty much going to leave you with a concept checked here. The question I'm going to ask is, should your media queries be at the top or the bottom of that page where you have your little @media? The example I just showed you is that, well, they should go closer to the bottom. Have all your default styling first and then trigger media questions. But in all honesty, it's a bit of a trick question. If you're assuming min width, if you're doing mobile first, put the rules on the bottom. If you're using somebody else's code and they didn't use that mobile first paradigm and they're searching for max width, then it's completely the opposite. You want to put those rules at the top. It can be tricky, and that's why I encourage you to get into good habits at the beginning and continue them as you get better and better at coding responsive design. Hi everybody. Today, with this lecture, I'm hoping you'll sit with me and write up some code where we use media queries to produce responsive navigation. In particular, we want to make one page where the navigation bar is at the top on a small screen and off to the side on larger screens. So let's look at some code. So what I have here is some HTML that doesn't have any styling on the navigation bar. So what you have is a nice horizontal line of links right up here at the top of your page. Oops, right down there. What I would like to do is design my page so that on small screens, the navigation bar is still on the top, but instead, when I'm on larger screens, we have more room to play with. So I want to put that navigation bar off to the side. So let me draw you a little picture here. Small screen, I want the bar to be along the top here, and then you'd have all the content. But on a larger screen, maybe this big, well, then I want my navigation bar to be along the side, and we can put all the content right off to the right. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. Because we want to do mobile first, that means by default, we already have it set up where the navigation bar is where we want it. But let's go ahead and add a little bit of styling. I'm going to cheat and copy and paste this in here for just a second. What I've done is I've just added a little bit of styling to not only the navigation, but now we also have it so that the links themselves are also styled. So I've put in some border radius to make them nice and circular. I've added the margin and the padding. And just in case you look at it and kind of wonder what's going on, I've done a little trick that I do in order to center text inside these little links. I've gone ahead and set the line height to 45 pixels. What this does is it gives this kind of little extra padding on the top and the bottom to help fill up the size. You should play with this and kind of see if you like it. Well, even though we have it looking great the way we want it on a small screen, let's see what happens when we make the screen larger. Well, at the moment, nothing happens when we make the screen larger. And that makes sense because we didn't put in any media queries. We do have a slight bit of responsive design simply because I've used fluid measurements. That margin and that padding, it's going to adjust as I resize the screen. But I don't just want things to adjust, I want a completely new layout. So let's get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is add in my media query. At media, all, and min width. I'm just going to go ahead and set this to 900 pixels. It's a kind of nice big size, and it'll give us a really clear breakpoint as to where we want things to change. So I've done that, and now I can start adding new rules. Some people love to jump right in and start doing a whole bunch of coding. It would make sense that since we're doing navigation bars, that we would want to start adjusting the different navigation. I'm not going to do that though. What I always recommend is somebody write a very simple, clear rule. The reason is, it's really easy for you to figure out whether or not your rules are triggering. So let's go ahead and just change the entire color of the body of this page. So I'll put in body, curly bracket, background, color, I'll just make it blue. Okay. All right, it worked. If for some reason you typed that in and it didn't change anything on your screen, you want to stop. Don't start doing new complicated things if you can't even get this little one to get going. So I'm going to stop for a second, make this a slightly less obnoxious color here. See if I can get away with gray. There we go, and you can still see everything. If you've run into problems, the parts that you want to check are, go in. Did you remember to have minimum width? If you do maximum width, then as you make it larger, it might trigger on and off. Make sure you've added the pixels at the end so it knows what it's looking for. Make sure you have 2 sets of curly brackets. Notice I have one set that starts my media query and then a second one that goes with the body selector. If that's going, let's go ahead and move on to how we would change that navigation bar to be off to the side instead of on the top. So one of the first steps we're going to want to take is changing the styling for the nav tag. I have it for you right here along with the little typo I see. For the most important thing is that I want this to be off to the side now. By default, nav is block, so it takes up the entire width. Now I only want it to take up a small bit along the side. In fact, I said that I want it to take up 20%. So as the screen gets larger, it will still take up 20% of the screen. I also have a min width of 125 pixels because I just don't want it to get too small. This now has placed the nav bar off to the side, but it still doesn't look quite right. What I need is I need to style those individual links as well so that they go right underneath each other. Let's do that next code. So how do I do that? How do I get the links to go underneath each other? Oh, well, that's not too hard if you remember some of the more advanced CSS you've learned earlier. The most important thing is that I want to make it display block right here. Once you do that, well, now they have to go underneath each other. I played a little bit with the text decoration and the padding, but other than that, everything is just a little bit of extra styling. The important thing for the layout was to make everything display block. So let's take a look at what we have for a second. We have our navigation bar, and it's off to the side as we were hoping, and it only takes up some of the space. But we really wanted the content to be next to it. We wanted it to be over here to the side. And instead, it ended up underneath. What do we need to do? If we were in class, in real life, I would sit there and stare at you until someone finally raised their hand and made a guess. But you're lucky we're not there together, so I'm just going to tell you. The problem isn't with our navigation. It's actually with the section that comes underneath it. I'm going to go down here. If you think about it, every section by default is block. So it's a simple enough trick to get these things to be next to each other. I'm going to add the code right now. So in order to get this to work, I've added a little bit more code. I went in and I said, you know what? The section can't be block. It needs to be inline block. And since I made the navigation bar about 20%, I went ahead and made this 70% because I'm not feeling like I want to do the math of the margins and the padding right now. I also set the height to 100 viewport height to take up the whole screen. I did have to go back and change one thing up in my nav as well. I had to add a float left right down here, if you look. And this is what lets these two things be next to each other, off to the side. So let's take a look at what we've got. On the big screen, we've got the vertical navigation bar. On the small screen, we jump back to the horizontal navigation bar. Neither one of these things had a lot of tricky CSS to it, but the important part was remembering to put in that media query. That's what triggers everything. So if you didn't code along with me right now, I hope you'll stop, write some code on your own, and see if you can't get things to move around. And try to do it in such a way that you can see it really making sense, where you know that on small screen phones, they really do their navigation differently than if you're on a laptop. Good luck, and make sure to post questions if you run into trouble. Hi everyone, let's do some coding. I've provided for you the HTML and the CSS to create this site right here. It's a pretty simple site with 9 different images, and underneath each image is a paragraph tag describing the color. At the very bottom of the page, I'm going to scroll kind of quickly here, you will see that I've also included a jump to content link, which when I click on it, scrolls all the way back to the top of the page. So I've given all this code to you. Your job is to make it responsive. You will be writing 2 media queries. The first media query should trigger at 772 pixels and change the layout so that the divs are 45% of the viewport width and the images should be no more than 30% of the viewport height. Let me show you an example. Here I am at 743, and I'm just about to click over. And you can see as I make it bigger, there's always 2 next to each other, and they grow up to as much of 30% of the screen height. So that is going to be what we call our tablet view. Scroll down to the bottom, and you can see this white one is all by itself because we had 9 images. Let's jump to the top again. Your second media query should trigger at 998 pixels, and it should change the layout again so that each div is 30% of the viewport width. You can see I've clicked that number, and now I've got 3 no matter how big I make the screen. Okay. So let me review this. I'm going to show you one more time. This is our mobile view. This is our tablet view. And this is our large screen view. It's not going to be a lot of code. It's just going to be 2 media queries. And inside those media queries, you're going to update the divs and the images. Some of the properties that you're going to need include display, width, and max height. Good luck! Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of responsive design. I wanted to take just a minute to stop and check in with you before we begin. The reason is, for the first time, we might be using some concepts that you are not familiar with from HTML or CSS. These concepts are display properties called grid and flex. If you've done them before, great, we're going to have some fun with it. If you haven't done grid or flex before, I recommend you take the time to watch a couple of quick videos and/or do the readings so that you'll understand a little bit better what I'm doing in my code with me. For the media queries for accessibility, this is probably going to be brand new for a lot of you. So, there's always comfort in learning something together. What makes it a little bit tricky for me to teach this is that the accessibility preferences are tied to your browser. So if you're using Chrome and someone else is using Firefox and someone else is using Safari, etc., I can't always know what the most up-to-date options are. So I will do my best to always have readings that will kind of link back and show you which options you can turn on and off. And you really want to learn how to do that, right? Because if part of doing accessible design is making sure that you actually test it. So we're going to have some fun this week. There's going to be a lot of coding. Hopefully you'll get a chance to really get your hands dirty and play with media queries. But again, I can't stress enough that this week will require you looking some things up on your own and hopefully helping each other out on the message boards. Good luck. Hi everyone, and welcome to A Code with Me. Today, we're going to play with grids, grid elements, and media queries. So before we get into the fun stuff, let me show you the outline of the HTML code. I've created a div. Inside that div, I've added 9 images. I also gave that div a class, and, well, I called it grid because that's what we're going to be playing with. I also have the start of some CSS. As you can see, I used display grid. I did grid template columns 95%. That means have a single column, and that single column should take up about 95% of that div. I also used justify content space evenly, so our one column will be right in the middle. And I also used something called row gap, which gives just a little bit of space in between each of the rows. For those of you who were with me before when we talked about grid in an earlier class, you'll notice that I've also included a dot grid image with a width of 100%. The reason is we want to use responsive design, right? And so if people are hard coding the width of their images to say 200 pixels or 300 pixels, then they will always stay that width. By saying width 100%, our images are going to shrink and or grow depending upon how many columns we have and how big those columns are. So let's jump out of this code for a second and just take a look at what the page looks like. So here's the page, and your first thought might be, Colleen, those pictures are enormous. They're way too big for this screen size. But I'm going to challenge and come back and say, no, I'm designing for mobile first. So I'm going to go up to my inspect element, and I'm going to see what this looks like on the mobile view. And you can see that, well, oh, actually, shockingly, Colleen's right? On a mobile device, it actually looks pretty good when you only have one picture at a time. Right? So I've successfully created my mobile first view. It's time for me to add some media queries so I can have it have a different layout depending upon the screen size. So let's start adding some media queries. I'm going to start out with a media query, let's say at 772 pixels. I just kind of picked that at random. One of the first things I like to do is add a property value where I change the background color of something big and bold, just so I can make sure I wrote my media query correctly. So I added it. I'm going to save here. I'm going to go back to my browser. With my responsive on, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and see what happens once I pass the 772 pixels. Great, it popped up red. If it didn't pop up red for you, go back and make sure that you didn't accidentally make a typo, like you didn't accidentally put multiple E's in screen, or make sure that you didn't forget the pixel, the PX. These are little things that can really mess somebody up. Right? Once I'm sure that my media query is working correctly, let's add a media query that actually has to do with the grid. So I'm going to start out with dot grid. And now I want it to be a 2-column grid. So I already have above that it should be a 1-column grid, 95%, spaced evenly, etc. I don't need to rewrite all that code. All I need to write is grid, template, columns, and I'm going to do 45% and 45%, and I'm going to hit save. So with just these few lines of code, my site now looks like, going here, this on a smaller screen, and as the screen gets larger, we jump to 2 columns. Now, it's important to scroll through your page, kind of take a look around. I'm not loving Bacon my dog's picture here kind of hanging out in the middle. So either using our Visual Studio Code or Inspect Element, let's go ahead and add some additional properties. I'm going to start with align items, and let's try center. Take a look. Yeah, I like that one a lot better. Another one you might want to play with is stretch. It makes all the pictures the same size, but it's not one of my favorites. All right? So we now have 2 views, our default mobile view and our kind of mid-screen 772 pixels. Let's see what happens when we add another media query. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it underneath. I want you to be very careful to notice, oops, apparently I didn't paste correctly. There we go. The double curly brackets, okay? These double curly brackets. This curly bracket matches our CSS rule. This curly bracket matches our media query. You always need 2 at the end, okay? So now let's do something for, let's say, 950 pixels. I'm going to leave the grid alone. The grid's good. I like the 2-column grid. Instead, let's play with the idea of changing some of the items inside the grid. So I'm going to do dot grid image. And let's do something a little fancier. Nth child 3n. So every third image, I would like it to take up both columns. This means start in the first column and span 2 columns. All right, let's see how I did here. Take a look. So picture 1 and 2 are just how we would like them to be. Picture 3 takes up the whole width. 4 and 5 are just the way we'd like them to be. Picture 6 takes up the whole width. All right, let's do one last media query. All right, because I'm making it look all easy right now, and I want to show you something that could throw you for a loop. I've decided on my largest screen, let's say 1100 pixels. I would like to go back and I would like it to be a 3-column. So dot grid, template columns, 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. I'm using the FR. It's kind of like a shortcut for %, but it doesn't make you do the math. So this will be 3 columns. I'm going to save it. Let's take a look. And I need to make sure I'm at least 1100 pixels. So let's see if I can make this a little bigger, to make my screen a little bigger here. There we go. Oh, wait. Definitely have 3 columns, but that third picture looks funky, right? It didn't fall into place the way I hoped it would. Well, part of designing mobile first is to realize that sometimes you want to undo some of the things from your mobile view. It's not just adding new things, sometimes it's undoing things as well. So I'm going to steal this down here, and I'm going to say, not only do I want it to have 3 columns, let's put this back to auto. All right, so here we go. One last change I'm going to make, because I'm not a big fan of this. I am going to make my grid images, dot grid, all of them, be, actually I don't need to do this. I'm going to go right up here, and I'm going to change this to align items stretch. When I do this, now all of them fit together nicely. They're a little skewed, but they all fit together nicely. All right. So this was a lot, right? This was a lot of coding for me to do, but I want you to notice how I started small, right? I add a couple lines of code, I go and I check it. Add a couple lines of code, I go and I check it. Because you try to add a whole bunch of code, it's going to be a nightmare. All right. So check for typos, check those curly brackets, and make sure each smaller view looks good before you go on to your next larger view. Good luck. Hi everyone. One of my favorite places to use Flex, which I don't use very often, is in navigation bars. I feel like Flex and media queries go really well together because Flex by kind of default is very flexible. It can grow and shrink, but you still need a little bit of media queries if you really want to have that kind of extra oomph to your page. So what I have right now is I have some of the same code I've used before, and I have set up my navigation so that it's kind of like stacked, right? So it's one right on top of the other as opposed to going kind of horizontal across the screen. And I did that by using display flex, flex direction column. I did also add a list style none, bumped up the size and things like this. But we're really interested in this display flex, all right? Because on a small screen, let's go ahead and take a look at this. You know, it looks good. It makes sense that it goes up and down. But when we get to a larger screen, it might be the case that we want it to really stretch out instead of taking up so much space. So we're going to start by doing our usual media query. At media screen and, min width, I will pick 800 pixels. All right. So what is it I decided I wanted to change? I wanted to change this nav UL, and I'm going to change my flex direction to row. All right, let's take a quick look. And we pop over here. We can now see that, yes, it is going in a row rather than in a column. That doesn't mean it looks good yet, though. All right, so I'm for just a second going to move away from my coding screen and really focus in on this browser. So I've opened up my page and I'm navigating an inspect element down to my nav UL. From here, I can start playing with some of the different properties using inspect element. So I'm going to go right in here and I'm going to add justify content, and then I will use the up arrow key to scroll through my different options. Space around, space between, center. I kind of like, for this medium view, I like this idea of using center. So once I find something I like, actually I don't like center. I'm going to go back. I am a big fan of the difference between space around and space between is very slight, just so you notice. Space between leaves no space on the edges. Space around does. Yeah, I kind of like that one. This is a great example of using inspect element to kind of cycle through your options so you don't need to spend as much time trying to guess. All right, so let me go back to my code. Now that I'm back in my code, I can add my justify content. I think I said I kind of like space between. I'm going to save it, and let's take a look at our final page. And thanks to our media queries, we can go from having a stacked navigation bar to one that goes horizontal. Again, you don't need to write a lot of code. In here, we're just going to add one media query, and we're going to change the direction for the flex. And you can get a whole new look that will work better for the people visiting your page. Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about media queries for accessibility. It's been great looking at different breakpoints to figure out how we want to lay things out on the screen, but it's not always just about the screen size. Sometimes people have different preferences that they put onto their machine. These might include things such as prefers reduced motion, prefers contrast, or prefers color scheme. For many people, this is a brand new topic. Even for the most experienced designers, they haven't necessarily thought about how they can have their code react to these user preferences. So today, let's take a look. First, I want to explain to you what prefers reduced motion is. This is an excellent add-on that I personally have on my computer. And when it's on, the idea is that I am signaling to developers that if at all possible, please disable animation, or at the very least, offer a more subtle version. It's incredibly valuable for users that experience motion sensitivities. But it can also be integrated with low battery mode, right? You're on your phone, you're running low. The last thing you need is for battery sucking applications to run. So let's look at two examples for prefers reduced motion. Your first reaction, if you're following along, might be, this looks like documentation. Documentation is boring. Many times it is, but I think this page and the ones that are to follow give really good examples. Before I scroll down, though, and go over these examples with you, I do want to warn you that there's quite a bit of motion, so you might want to think about just listening to this lecture rather than following along visually if you do get motion sick. Right? So let's scroll down to the bottom. And you can see that their code has what I find to be a nauseating animated box. So I'm going to click on their play button. And you will see that they have something called animation, and it's pulsing. It's very pulsing. All right. And underneath this, they have prefers reduce motion, and they've asked it to be a little less dramatic. In order for us to turn this on, we're going to need to go into our system settings and turn on prefers reduce motion. For an Apple, or for Mac, excuse me, I'm going to go into System Preferences. In Search, I'm going to type in Accessibility. I personally have Show Accessibility Status in the menu turned on, so I don't need to look for it. I'm going to go to Display. I'm going to move this window for just a second so you can see what's going on, and I'm going to click on Reduce Motion. And you can see that kind of pulsing purple box has been removed and replaced with more of like this less dramatic animated box. I'm going to push back here for a second. I think even with prefers reduce motion, this is too much. So I'm going to go into the code right over here, and I'm going to change the animation to none. I think this is how prefers reduce motion should actually work, but it's a great first example. Let's look at example number 2. Example number 2 is triggered when you put your mouse over this button. So I'm going to go ahead and put it over and take it off. And I'm going to put it back over and I'm going to take it off again. And you might be thinking, I don't see a difference. You are correct. That is because if you think back, just a few moments ago, I turned prefers reduced motion on. Once you turn it on, it's going to stay on until you turn it off. So let's take a look at those preferences again. I have it open again. I'm going to unclick reduce motion. And now let's put our mouse over this again. See that kind of weird wiggly thing? So by default, that wiggly thing is on. I personally would prefer not to have it on. So again, if I go into my accessibility preferences and I turn that reduce motion on, we're all set. Let's take a look at prefers color scheme. This is actually a pretty well used preference that people have on their laptops and computers. People can choose between a light or dark color scheme. It's utilized by persons with vision issues and by people who may be using their device in a low or high light environment. So think about it. You're on your laptop, you suddenly realize it's sunny outside, and so, if you live in the Midwest, you go running outside because it's so unlikely. You might have a hard time reading your screen if it's too bright outside, so you can turn on a dark color scheme. Let's take a look at an example again. The prefers color scheme media query will actually take a few different values. It can take light or dark. I believe that the default is light, so if you don't put anything, it's going to assume that people have a light color scheme. Let's take a look at their example. All right, so what we have here is we have 4 boxes, and theme A and theme B are the initial themes. Let's go into our preferences and turn dark mode on and see how this page looks if we have the dark mode. Again, I'm going to go up to System Preferences. Now I want to go to General. And I'm going to switch it to a dark color scheme. All right, so again, I'll go back and forth. So if my computer's in light color scheme, it looks like this. If my computer's in dark color scheme, it looks like this. All right, I think that's kind of cool. I think it's a nice way for you to provide different looks for different users. Finally, let's talk about prefers contrast. This is a fairly new preference that has been coming into the browsers, so not everyone will be able to turn this on or off on their operating system. So I'm going to kind of give a more general example. But the idea is that definitely some people prefer more or less contrast on their pages. So there is a media query for that. For the prefers contrast media query, we actually have a few more options than we do with the other two. You can have no preference, more contrast, less contrast, or even a custom contrast. Okay? Let's take a look at their example. When I go in here and I click on the play, you can see up in this corner there's a very light contrast box. I'm actually not able to turn low contrast on here with this operating system. So what I'm going to do instead is just show you the CSS. So when the person prefers contrast more, this is what it would look like. As you can see, it is now a solid black line, while before the default was to have a dotted black line. It's just one more tool for you to use in your tool belt. My hope is that while I was showing you those accessibility media queries, you were sometimes thinking, wow, I could use that, or I definitely know people who utilize those different preferences. Accessibility checks can improve the experience for all users, not just some really small subgroup. Good media queries can allow you to keep inaccessible components on your page. All the time, my students will make something and I give them credit. It's really cool, right? Like the things they've created is really cool. But when you create something really cool that makes your teacher get dizzy and fall over, you're probably not going to get a good grade. But these accessibility media queries let them keep their cool, flashy concepts while still allowing me to turn them off and enjoy the rest of their page. Designing for accessibility means getting comfortable with using different operating systems and different browsers. I hope this lecture helped you realize that responsive design is about much, much more than just screen sizes. It's about incorporating all the different preferences and tools that your users might be using and allowing them to have the optimal experience on your page. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Do you ever just have those days when nothing seems to go right? Appropriately, I'm having one of those, and I think it's really kind of funny that I'm now going to talk to you about accessibility testing, because really the key to creating an accessible site is to think about what you're doing before you do anything at all. So hopefully, up till now, you've been thinking about your layout before you even begin to write your code. And then, as you're writing your code, you're testing it every few minutes even, if not every couple hours or every day. You don't want to wait until you're all quote unquote done, because you're going to end up finding that you had small, tiny errors at the beginning that seem to propagate. So before we jump into any CSS, you want to make sure that you have no syntax errors, and you can use the W3 validator to find that out for you. Test your site frequently as you add CSS, or if you're adding JavaScript as well. Many places depend upon automated testing, and these testers are being released and updated constantly. In fact, it can be a little overwhelming. I'm going to show you one site right now from the W3 Consortium where they have a list of web accessibility evaluation tools. You can see here on this page that we have basically hundreds of things to choose from. In fact, it's showing 166 tools to be exact. And how are you supposed to know which ones are best for you? Well, what you can do is you can use these filters off to the side, where you can say whether you would like your page to be WCAG 2.0 compliant, WCAG 2.1, lots of different options, many of which you probably don't know yet. So I'm going to go ahead and say WCAG 2.0 because it's one of the most up-to-date. That's only narrowed it down to 138 tools. So I'm going to scroll further to the bottom. And you can also filter it by the type of language you want, supported formats. I'm going to click on type of tool. And the ones that I would recommend for you at the moment would be anything that's a browser plugin. Browser plugins are tools that you can add to Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser you're looking for, and it lets you check the page automatically. In fact, let's talk about some of my own personal favorites. Three tools that I have seen or used include the Wave Web Accessibility Tool, Lyra, and Axe. Since I primarily use Wave and Axe, let me show you how I installed them and then ran the accessibility checkers. The nice thing about the Wave evaluation tool is that it gives you two options. You can either enter a URL for the web page you want to test, or you can install a browser if you want to test local code. So let's take a look at adding a URL. What Wave does is it goes through your page and it looks for common errors. Here, I see that it has listed 5 errors, and I can see what they are if I click on the Details tab. It looks like 3 of the images are missing alternative text, and at least 2 form elements are missing a label. In addition, it is detecting 28 very low contrast errors. So I'm going to click on the contrast button, and we can look at these in more detail. Now, the interesting thing is, sometimes it finds errors that aren't actually errors. So for instance, it's detecting that there is white text on a white background on this web page. That's why you see FFF and FFF. If I change the background color, nothing is actually going to change on the page. That's because there's a background image. So even though it's detecting a contrast error, this is not actually the case because there's an image with a darker background. However, a better accessibility coding would be to include a default background image just so the checker can be sure. Other times there is an actual issue. So I'm going to show you some of the things we could do if we wanted to look more. I'm going to see if I can find one lower down. What you can do, I think it's the same error every time because they don't know there's background images, is if you're pretty sure that that's not the case, you can use these sliders right here to change the background color and the foreground color until you get to pass and pass. At that point, you can copy the hexadecimal code and add them to your code. Another option is to install a browser extension. Down here, you can see that they offer extensions for Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. I'm going to click on the Web Chrome extension. I'm going to go ahead and click to install it. And I'm going to do this step right here to add it to Chrome. Now, if I go back to visit the Academic Innovation page, I can click on my extensions in the upper corner and click Wave Evaluation Tool. And I get all of the same results. This is helpful because sometimes when you're developing code, you can't actually get to other people's sites, right? There's blockers. So if you try to evaluate their site, it's going to block it. So in this case, you can actually, using the extension, block or check files that only you have access to that other people do not have access to. In order to check local files, I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to go back up to the extension. I'm going to click on Manage Extensions. I'm going to go to the Wave Evaluation tool and click on Details. If you are working on files locally, that means you're coding them in Sublime right now, and they don't exist on the web yet, right? They're not on GitHub, and it's not on Replit. It only exists on your computer. You want to go down and select the option for Allow Access to File URLs. This will let you check any type of file at all. Wave is great, and I love it for color contrast and really basic accessibility checking. One I use for a deeper accessibility checking is called AxeDQ. When you go to install this one, though, it's a little bit different. So let's install, for me, the free Chrome extension. I'm going to do the same step where I go to Add to Chrome. And most extensions allow you to just kind of right-click and run it. In order to use Axe development tools, you're going to have to use Inspect Element. All right, so when you install it, it'll show you some instructions, but I'm going to show you as well. I'm back at the Academic Innovation page. I'm going to go to Extensions. And if you notice, if you click on Axe, all it does is pop up a little window. It doesn't actually check anything. If we want to use it, what we need to do is I'm going to right-click. We're going to choose Inspect. A lot of scary stuff might pop up to the side. You should recognize elements, right? We've been using that for our CSS. If you've done any JavaScript, you might also recognize console. I'm going to make this entire window bigger. And eventually, you should see Axe. I'm not seeing it yet, so I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to, I was just one away. I'm going to highlight this and open it up. The very first time you use it, it'll ask you to select your role and agree to the permissions. And then I'm going to click on Scan All of My Page. Now, while Axe is running, let me tell you right off the bat, Axe is notorious about color contrast errors that don't exist. So you really want to pay attention more to the roles, the issues that they mark as critical versus moderate. And they've shown a lot of the same things that Wave showed, including images must have alternative text. It'll take you to those images. It'll even highlight them for you. It also, the next error was, got a few here, alternative text. And you can kind of just click through and solve them. I like how with Axe, it does give you little tips onto how to solve the problems. So Wave is what I use for color contrast errors. Axe is what I use for really deep debugging. So as I mentioned, there are so many great tools out there and new ones coming out all the time. Some of the testing tools use something called personas. This is a fancy way of saying that they try to put a human face to the accessibility issue. So they'll name it something kind of cutesy like Dizzy Desi or something like Short-Sighted Sue. Just make sure that when you are trying out accessibility checkers, that there's this issue called trying on a disability. We always want to be human first. And remember that this isn't some sort of novelty. This is something that people really need to access your page. So again, accessibility is great, but the way we approach it is also important. Even the best automated checkers can miss something, so manual testing is always needed. At a bare minimum, you always want to review the content visually. Read it out loud. Do the words make sense? Did you use kind of a reading level that is accessible to your key target audience? Next, navigate through your page with a keyboard. That usually means going through and hitting tab, 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 and the arrow keys to make sure that you can access all the content. I have a great example for you of something that people often miss. People often add things where you have to hover over something in order to see somebody's name or role or email. You don't want to do that because not everyone uses a mouse. Finally, you also want to use a screen reader, right? Because just because we can see it on the screen doesn't mean that everyone will access it that way. I've included some readings with more in-depth testing as well, if it interests you. In fact, if you've been intrigued by this idea of accessibility and making things in the web more available to everyone, you should know that careers in accessibility are exploding right now, and you do not need to be a professional coder to find your place in this growing field. We really need people who know just enough about HTML and CSS so that they can communicate with the professional coders to point out to them some of the issues that they're finding on the pages. Hi everybody. Frameworks is one of those words or terms that people really love to throw out there. The term framework can really mean different things depending upon who you ask and what they do. The general agreement, though, is that frameworks are meant to make your job easier by providing code and structure. Once you learn how to use a framework, you're able to develop your sites quickly and easily without changing too much code. So again, when we talk about framework, we want to think about what does framework mean here in this class. For front-end developers, frameworks provide tools for CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery. They're these little bits of code that you can use to get an instant look that you're looking for, and sometimes an instant behavior that you're looking for as well with the JavaScript and the jQuery. If you're a back-end developer, this is something completely different as far as frameworks go. Now you're looking at code that's going to help you do routing, resources, templates, and security. So this is something completely different. So when we're done here, and after we're done talking about frameworks, you might find that you don't necessarily understand some of the terms that other people are using. Just make sure that you realize that we're doing front-end development, not back-end development. With saying that, I think it's important that you know at least a handful of frameworks that people are using today. The first one that I'm going to mention, and the one that we're going to study in this course, is Bootstrap. Bootstrap was developed in 2011, and basically the reason it's so popular is because it's popular. It was one of the first, and once you get that niche, people really tend to use it over and over again. So what does this mean for you in this class and with any web development that you plan on doing? Templates are really interesting. Some people build their sites directly from the template. They grab some HTML code, they change it around, and they're done. They only provide the content, and they still get a great looking site. Other people develop their code on their own, but they'll go in and they'll use some frameworks to add little functionality that they don't want to code themselves or they're unable to code themselves. Now, there are things such as pure coders, particularly computer scientists and the really, us really geeky types, who sometimes think, nope, I'm going to write everything from scratch. I'm not going to use other people's code. I disagree with that. I think that if you want to learn web design, it's important that you get to know at least one popular framework. That way, you'll be able to communicate with others who are doing web design and also, if need be, jump in quickly. As we start to learn more about Bootstrap, I want you to understand that it's a tool and it's supposed to be making your life easier. If it isn't, that's okay. You can go back to coding on your own, but you still want to know a little bit about it. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a framework for creating websites that's pretty popular among web designers. It focuses on a responsive, mobile-first approach. And what this means for you is that responsive design is pretty much built in. And they do a really good job of making sure that their pages look good on small screens and then build incrementally out from there. Bootstrap consists of CSS and HTML templates that you can use and reuse. It also includes JavaScript extensions, which is really handy because it's a way to add JavaScript to your pages even if you don't know how to use JavaScript yourself. Finally, the emphasis for Bootstrap is on what we call interfaces and layouts. It gives us this very familiar look and feel to sites that were made with Bootstrap. Speaking of that, who uses Bootstrap? There are a lot of popular sites that are or were built using Bootstrap. These include NBA.com, Target.com, Walmart, Codecademy, Bloomberg, and Airbnb. If you'd like, you can even go to this website, builtwithbootstrap.com, to see a list of different sites that use Bootstrap. You wouldn't do that necessarily just to go, hey, let's go ahead and look at all the sites. Instead, it's a really nice place to go to give you ideas for all the different layout designs that are out there for you to use as a building block. There are a number of benefits of using Bootstrap. One is that it has a very handy 12-column grid system. What this does is it helps with spacing issues. If you've ever spent a lot of time trying to center something exactly in the page or lay out 3 columns in a row and have them spaced out nicely, you know that it can take a lot of time. When you add in the fact that this column system has built-in responsive design, it makes it a really attractive option to learn about. Next, Bootstrap tries to include all the very common jQuery functionalities. These include things like accordions with the drop up and down of content. It includes drop-down menus and also carousels for pictures. It actually has a lot of different functionalities, but I like to just mention some of the ones that people use the most. Finally, Bootstrap has that familiar look and feel I mentioned before. Many sites use Bootstrap, and when you use it, it helps make your site and any forms that you might want people to fill out look what we can call legitimate. It looks like a real site. And that's really valuable because it's important for people to have confidence in your site when they go to visit it. So why should you consider using Bootstrap, or at least know a little bit about it? First of all, it can lead to really fast development. You can have a great looking site up in really just a few moments. Second, it's platform independent, so it's going to look great no matter what browser people are using. It's responsive by default. You don't need to do anything to make it look good on different browsers. It does it by itself. And finally, it's customizable. It's one of those things where you can like so many things about it, but if there's something that you don't like, that's okay. You can go in and you can change the values to give it the look that you want it to have. But there are reasons why you might not want to use Bootstrap. One of the biggest complaints is that Bootstrap doesn't always follow best practices. For the longest time, people have really stressed that we want to separate content from layout in our web pages. And when you use Bootstrap, those lines become a little bit blurred, and it's often very easy to see that we're combining them. Another reason that you may want to avoid using Bootstrap is that it can be very what we call resource heavy. As I mentioned, it has the ability to do carousels and accordions and drop-down menus and other things with JavaScript. And it has so many different entities built into it that oftentimes you're going to be using more than you really needed if you have a simple page. Finally, that look is somewhat generic. And while I put that as a plus point one slide earlier when I said it gives people confidence in that you have a real page, if you're making your site because you're artistic or creative, or you want to show that you are really an innovative thinker, then you might not want to use Bootstrap. You might really want to head off on your own. When we talk about Bootstrap in this class, there are a number of different ways we can approach it. One is as a supplement to your style. You've already coded it up and you just want to add one or two things that Bootstrap can offer. That's great. Another way to look at Bootstrap is to download one of their themes and then you go on and you expand upon it, or maybe instead take a little bit away. So it's important to understand that Bootstrap is something that you want to use, not something that you feel confined by. We're going to talk about the basics of Bootstrap. We're going to talk about navigation and images and the grid system. But it's important to know that there are still going to be many parts left untouched that we can't reach. If and when you decide to go and use some of that Bootstrap code, just remember it's important to test your code often when you're using something that isn't yours. So make sure you code a little bit, test, code a little bit, and test. And I hope you remember to keep up that practice over this next week when we start adding Bootstrap to our code. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about the grid system for Bootstrap. I want to start off by saying, if at the end of this video you completely understand the Bootstrap layout system, you are awesome. Because for most of us, it takes at least 2 or 3 times of looking at the material, playing with it, and then doing it all over again to really get a good understanding of how this works. So I'm hoping that you'll follow along with me. We'll do an example in one of the next videos, and then you come back and you listen to this material again and see if it's starting to really make sense. Bootstrap can see every element as something you can break down into 12 columns. So if you have a page, Bootstrap can take any element and say, oh, all right, there's a container. Let's pretend I drew 12 columns. We can break it up, and then you can tell Bootstrap whether you want to place something here, or maybe all 3 of these. Now, it's kind of funny because for the longest time, people have said, never use tables to lay out the content of your web page. That's breaking really some of those basic rules and tenets of content versus layout. But that's why everyone says Bootstrap uses a grid. It's not a table. So you kind of have to throw that practical reasoning out for a little bit if you're going to be using Bootstrap. So with this table, we can basically say if you want to use 3 columns, it's the same as saying a width of maybe 25%. 6 columns is 50%, 9 columns is 75%. All 12 columns means you're taking up the full width of the page or that element. Every grid in Bootstrap consists of a container class, a row class, and then 1 or more column classes. So the actual code itself is going to look like this, where XX is going to be the viewport size, and YY is going to be the number of columns that you want to use. Let's take a look. So let's look at our example. The class is always going to start with those 3 letters COL. The XX component is the viewport size. So it's going to be XS for extra small, think your mobile phones, small for maybe those tablets, MD for medium, and LG is for large. Again, if you want to kind of think of numbers, you can think of something along the lines of about 480, 720, 992, and 1200. Now, I promised you a while ago you don't actually have to remember these numbers. I'm pretty sure that I got them wrong myself. So just remember more general concepts than the numbers. But you have to remember XS, SM, MD, or large. It has to be one of those 4 abbreviations. Once you've declared the viewport size, you can now say exactly how many columns you want this element to take up. Anything from 0, which means it shouldn't show up at all, to 12, which means take up the maximum width that it possibly can. So if you have an element that has class equals column extra small 12, you're saying, oh, if you're viewing this on a small screen, it should take up the full width. If you're looking at one that has a class of column small 8, oh, now you want to take up 8 out of those 12 columns, but only on the small screen. For column medium 4, you're saying, oh, if I'm on a medium screen, I want to use up 4 columns, or 1/3 of the entire screen size. And for column large 3, you're saying, oh, well, this is a large screen. It doesn't need to be as big as it was on those other screens. Let's just use up 1/4 or 25%. Now, this is the interesting thing. Many times you're going to combine these classes together. So let's think about if you're going to put pictures on your website. It's a very common idea to think, oh, well, on the small screen, I want 1 picture, and each picture should take up the whole width of the viewport. But if I'm on a larger screen, oh, well, then maybe there can be 3 across, and on a different screen, maybe 4 across. So let's imagine that I have an image, some sort of picture.jpg. And then we have our 4 screen sizes. So I might have my extra small, my small, my medium, and it's not quite going to look larger, but my large. When you look at column extra small 12, that means my image should take up pretty much the whole width. But if I'm showing this image on a small screen, I only want it to take up about half the size. That way, if there's other images, they can fill in next to me instead of under me. In the same way, if I'm going to have a medium screen, I only want it to take up about 1/4, leaving room for 3 other pictures. And then on a large screen, I'm going to draw it really small just to kind of be like, oh, I only want that to take up 1/6. So it's the same picture. It's the same HTML code. The difference is that on different viewports, the picture is going to look relatively big on a small screen and relatively small on a larger screen. So let's review that grid picture, but using the classes this time. Right here, we have nothing on there, but if I use column XX3, we're using 3 of the 12, or 25%. If I say column XX6, Oh, I'm using 50% now. Column XX9, 75%. And column XX12 means use up the full width that's available to you. But what if you want two elements next to each other, for instance, but only on a larger screen? Separate block, small screen, inline block on a large screen. Well, what we can do is we can start off by saying, oh, that yellow part of our page, well, on a small screen, I want it to take up the full width. But on a medium screen, I want it to take up only 3. So in here, when I'm looking at on a large screen, I'm only taking up 1, 2, 3 columns. All right. Then, if we add another div next to it, that div can say, oh, for this orange part, if I'm on a small screen, again, I want to use up the full width. But if I'm on a medium screen or bigger, well, then in that case, I want to use 8 columns. Now, if you're following me, hopefully you are, wake up, you'd realize that 3 plus 8 only equals 11. I didn't use the whole screen. I did that on purpose because I wanted to show you that it's absolutely okay to not use up the whole screen. The second thing you might be wondering is, what about small and large? I didn't say anything for those. I didn't mention them at all. Everything, since it's mobile first, propagates up. So if I define something for extra small, then by default, it's also going to apply to small, medium, large. Unless I specify something for medium, and then that's going to overwrite everything for medium and large. So you can really get away with just specifying 1 or 2 rules and still hit multiple breakpoints. It's actually quite possible to write even easier or cleaner code than what I just wrote here. Whenever you want to say something should be the full 12 columns and it's block already, by default it takes up the whole width, you can pretty much skip this whole column extra small 12 part. Bootstrap knows to do that by default. It says, oh, I already knew you were supposed to take up the full width. You don't need to tell me. Instead, you can just specify those rules where it's going to change. So I've dropped the smaller part, and this new rule now says basically anytime you are on a medium viewport or larger, make it 3 columns. By default, Bootstrap is going to put things as far to the left as it possibly can when it's positioning them. However, it is possible to add a push and a pull class on different elements. If you have column XX, push YY, you're basically saying, hey, on any viewport that's X, I want you to go ahead and push this element Y columns to the right. In the same way, there's a pull, and here you move columns to the left. We're not going to play with this right now, but it was something that I wanted you to be aware of. In the same way, I want you to know about the responsive utility classes. Earlier, I mentioned that you can have XX or something like XS column 0, or really for anything, you can have column 0 hides it from the screen. It's usually a lot easier to use the hidden class instead. Hidden XX basically says, oh, make this visible on every viewport except for the one we're going to mention right here. In the same way, visible XX says, oh, hide something. It shouldn't be visible unless I'm on this certain size screen. The last one we have is SR only. And this is a special Bootstrap utility class for screen readers. It hides the content for everyone unless they're using a screen reader to access the page. If they are, then this element is visible to them and them only. So we mention and we talk a lot about how Bootstrap is this mobile-first idea and that larger screens inherit value from smaller screens. I really think that the grid class is a great example for you to play with this and see how they work. The idea that if you define something for medium screens, it also applies for large screens. If you apply something to extra small screens, it also applies for every screen size that's bigger. There's a great site at Bootstrap, bootstrap.com/examplesgrid, where you can go through and you can see some of the examples that they've coded up for you. Really important. do the math. If you've got maybe a third grader or a fourth grader at home, someone who's about 8 to 9, have them check. Because one thing you always want to make sure you do is that the columns that you want to be next to each other shouldn't add up to more than 12. It seems like a simple thing, but it's very important. In the next video, we're going to code together and do some work with this grid class. I hope you'll join me and you'll get a really good feeling about how this works with Bootstrap. Hi everybody. Let's go over an example together where we're using the Bootstrap grid system. I'm going to go into CodePen and use this code so you can start from scratch or mess with the code and play with it with me. So, as you may recall, whenever you want to use the grid system for Bootstrap, it's important that you put two kind of wrapper classes around it. So here I have my class equals container and my class equals row. What I'm saying here is, it's time to look for those column medium 6, column large 2 different classes. And I want you to put these elements together based on being in the same row at times. I'm actually going to move this so I'm on a bit of a smaller screen to start with. And when we do this, we're going to go through and look at how the code works together. We don't even need to really look at the CSS for now, so I'll pull it out of the way. I have 4 divs inside here. Now in each case, each one of these divs is exactly the same. The code doesn't change at all. You can kind of trust me on that one. So we're just going to look at the first one and look at what that code does. The first thing we need to realize is, column medium 6 and column large 3. How many viewports do we have right here? How many different distinct looks are we coding for? At first glance, your answer might be 2. We're coding for the medium and the large screen. But don't forget, Bootstrap is always thinking mobile first. So by default, we have an extra small, maybe small view. So this, what we've done right here, is we've now made it so that there are 3 distinct views. One for the extra small and small screens, one for the medium screens, and one for the large screen. By default, whenever we're on an extra small screen and we didn't say anything else, Bootstrap is going to say, oh, you're going to do a div and you didn't tell me what to do? No problem. Let's make that sucker full screen. We're going to, by default, use all 12 columns. So that's why this little div right here says extra small and small screen. So my question is for you, why is it not showing medium screen and large screen? Why isn't that information showing up? Well, it's back to those Bootstrap utility classes. Down here, I have visible medium and visible large. This essentially says, you know what? I don't want you to show up unless I'm on a medium-sized screen. And down here, I don't want you to display unless you're on a large screen. As we transition from smaller to bigger, this one's going to go away. And this one will suddenly show up. So let's take a look. So right here, I've just hit the medium viewport screen size. And a few things have happened. First, the div that said extra small and small screen, it disappeared. It is now no longer visible. The second thing that happened is that the medium divs now have become visible. We couldn't see them before, and now we can. But the third thing that happened that you might not notice unless you really are thinking about it is before each div took up the full width of the screen. Remember, we had 4 boxes, boom, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, instead of taking up the full width, we're only taking up 6 columns. We're not taking up 12. So we've really changed the look of this. We've changed the content, but we've also changed the layout. So instead of having 4 on top of each other, we have 2 pairs of 2. Last thing I'm going to do next, of course, is go to the even larger screen. So in this next step, as we've reached the larger screen, the same type of thing has happened. The extra small and small divs, still hidden, still not there. Can't see this one, can't see that one. Now the large screen information is visible, and we've triggered this rule right here. We've said, oh, on a large screen, I want each one of these divs to take up 25% of the screen, 3 out of those 12 columns. And now everything is laid out in one big view. Hopefully at this point, you have a few questions. Unfortunately, I'm not right there to answer them. So I'm going to have to guess and maybe try to figure out some things that you might be wondering right now. I know one that I was wondering is this whole idea of what's with the extra space along the sides. Each one of these columns is supposed to be about 25%, but there's a lot of blank space around. One of those reasons is that the container class and the row class has padding and margin around it. So this is kind of dead space. Same over here. So we might be using up 25% of the space, but that's really only from here to here, not the full screen. That's something that's important to realize. The next thing that you may or may not be wondering is how I managed to style maybe the colors of the fonts or those borders around things. Feel free to go in and look at all the code that I have here, not just the HTML. I'm going to pull my CSS back over, and you can see that I have written some style sheets that say, oh, you know what? I want you to add a border, but only around those classes that start with the word visible. And you know what? On any class that ends in large, I want you to have it be red. Any that ends in medium, be blue, etc., etc. With this class, we may not do as many lectures as I've done in some of the other classes. There's a reason for that. I want you to spend your time playing with the code. Listening to me is awesome, I know it. But playing with code may be even better as far as learning things about what you're doing in web design. So play with this code, change things from visible to hidden. Go ahead and put in different numbers to see what happens. It can be a lot of fun to play with things and make things, break them, and fix them again. Good luck. Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about navigation bars. Navigation is one of those things about Bootstrap that's very familiar to people when they see sites that use Bootstrap. It always looks about the same, it works about the same, people are comfortable with it. The nav class is typically combined with other classes to create each different styled navigation that you're going to see. When you make a navigation bar, one of the first things you have to decide is what type of links you want. Bootstrap provides nav tabs and nav pills. So let's take a look at what these look like on the browser. Let's start with nav tabs. The first thing I hope that you would look at and see is that it doesn't look very good. I've got the code, I've taken it from Bootstrap, I went in and I used the nav class right here. Oops, change that to yellow. I used the nav class right here, and I also included the nav tabs class. This is something new people haven't always seen, that you can use multiple classes within the class. All right, so used it, looks correct, but I don't see any difference. This is something that's going to happen to you. The problem is I haven't linked to the Bootstrap CSS. Let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go into Settings. I'm going to click on CSS, and I'm going to go down here to Quick Add and add Bootstrap. And as soon as I save that, boom, there you go. That looks like a much more professionally designed navigation bar. So when you use the tabs, it's supposed to simulate that kind of look you see in a file tabbing system where you kind of flip through. Now, let's look at nav pills. Here, you can see that each one of the links basically has a different color. So you can go in, This one is blue, the other ones are white. They all have that kind of same square look. The reason that this one is blue and the others aren't is because I've added what's called an active class. This class right here says, oh, I want to distinguish this link from the other links, so let's make it a different color. I can play with that code, and I can change it so that instead of having this link be active, cut it, let's put it here, and now I've made the other one. It's not really a big deal whether you're going to use pills or tabs. It's just a design decision that you want to make a little bit early on. Once you've decided on either tabs or pills, another thing you're going to consider is the layout. Do you want your navigation bar to be horizontal, vertical, justified? There are a few different options, and I'm going to show you right now how you can quickly change them. Let's go ahead and just use the nav pills code. When I go back up to that unordered list element, I have that it should be nav and nav pills. What I want to add now is to say, you know what? Instead of being horizontal, I want to change it so that it's vertical or stacked. This simple class completely changes the look of our page. Another option that we can use is nav justified. When you use nav justified, by default, it's going to take as many links as you have and spread them out proportionally. So here, because I have 3 links, each link takes up 1/3 of the page. If I had 5, each would take up 20%, and different things like that. Now, the interesting thing about nav justified is that when you resize the window, it actually changes the look of the page. So now as I make it smaller, it changes from justified to stacked. This gives a kind of really cool look without you having to do much about it. So on the small view, you go to stacked. On the larger views, you're horizontal. Another thing you see a lot of people like to add to their navigation bars are these drop-down menus, where you have different options, but some of the options have sub-options to them. If you want to use drop-down menus, it's very important for you to remember to link to the Bootstrap JavaScript files and include that link at the bottom of your code to jQuery. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do. The example on Bootstrap is called Pills with Dropdowns. I've made my own example, and we're going to look at it now. It's called Responsive Design Dropdowns. So I've taken the code that they've used in Bootstrap, and I've made it so that it just looks a little bit more complete. I added in some regular links next to our drop-down link. Now, hopefully, when we go through, you would think that when I click on the drop-down, something should drop down, and it didn't. I do this on purpose because I really like to make the same mistakes that you guys possibly make. So first, I need to know, did I link to the Bootstrap JavaScript files? I can check up, and there's nothing there. I can check my settings, and I can see, yep, I forgot to add the Bootstrap files. Save. All right, I've saved it. I go down. It still doesn't work. What could be going on that where I'm linking to it, but my JavaScript or something dynamic isn't happening? This occurs a lot. So while I haven't actually forgotten it, as you may have, I did comment it out. I'm going to go back here and say, oh, I know there's this script I'm supposed to have down at the bottom, the one that links to jQuery. I'm going to save this now, and you can see that now the drop-down option works. Using Bootstrap is not meant to be difficult, but there are all these little tripping points. So that's why I encourage people to add code slowly and incrementally and keep testing every few minutes to make sure that you're on the right path. The last class I'm going to talk to you about with respect to navigation right now is the nav bar class. What it does is it kind of serves as a navigation header for either just that one part or your entire site. When you use navbar, the positioning is very important. You can have navbar static on the top, navbar fixed to the top, or navbar fixed to the bottom. And this is going to affect where your where your nav bar is going to show up and how it interacts with the other elements. Let's take a quick look. What I have here is that I've wrapped up my typical nav with nav pills, and I've put it inside of a nav bar class. I said, you know what, I want to use nav bar, let's use the default values, and I want it to be nav bar static top. This means put it at the top of the page, and as people scroll down, you can see pretty much nothing's going on as I scroll back and forth, right? That's how I want it to be. It's just always at the top. However, instead of being static, I can go in and I can change this to fixed. Before I could even hit save, I hope you notice that my content actually moved. I have changed the positioning of my nav bar from static to fixed, and fixed is what I call the annoying pop-up ad version of positioning. It means it's on top, it's not going to move. So if I go back down to my screen now, you can see that it actually hides some of the other stuff that's there. I'm going to make my screen smaller. You can see I can kind of scroll up and down here, but it's impossible to see the things that are underneath the nav bar. So when you use fixed, just be careful. The last option was to use bottom. And here, what I've done is I've simply moved my nav bar from the top to the bottom. But many times with fixed content, this works out much better because it doesn't cover up other things and at least take away the ability to scroll up and down and see them. Back when you were learning HTML, hopefully you learned about semantic tags. Some tags are very generic, div, p, different things like that. Other tags have meaning. Nav tag is one of those. It helps convey the semantics that this is a navigation section of your page. Using a nav tag and a nav class are not the same. A nav class does not convey any semantics. So whenever possible, augment your Bootstrap by using that nav tag. You can really just put it right before, close it right underneath what you're doing with navigation. Another option is to use what's called an area attribute, where you can put role equals navigation, and it provides the same type of accessibility information that that nav tag will provide. So let's go back, look at that code that I've provided, add some tags, play with the code, see how you can get your own navigation bar to show up on the screen. Hi everybody. This morning I was actually ready to tape and my interviewer didn't show up, but luckily I ran into one of my old students, Mike Wojin, in the hallway, and he's agreed to talk with me this morning about some of the things that he learned in my class, as well as some of the things that he wished he had learned. So good morning, Mike, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I literally work across the hallway. It was funny running into you this morning. I'm happy to come chat with you.
Great. So I wanted to just catch up a little bit. I know you've had a few jobs since you graduated. I was really curious about that first job, that kind of first job when you leave school and you have some knowledge but not a lot of experience. So what did you do when you first graduated?
Sure. So when I graduated, I found a job as a user experience analyst for the information technology services for U of M. And over there, I was working on websites and mobile apps, trying to make them easier to use for their main user base on campus.
Okay, that sounds great. Pretty much what you were studying for, so yep. That's unusual and wonderful. I was curious, and I want you to be honest here. Your teachers can't teach you everything. So I mentioned in web design in my lectures that you can follow along, but you don't really learn anything until you get your hands dirty. So I was curious if there were things I didn't talk about, because I know you took the class 3 or 4 years ago and things have changed since then. But, you know, when you got out there in the real world, what are things that you had to learn on your own?
Sure. So I think what we learned in your class was how to write HTML and CSS and kind of design really well, but sort of in a vacuum. And so learning how to apply those same skills in the real world was kind of a challenge. So starting out for ITS, I realized I had to work on some systems that were pretty foreign to me, like content management systems. Since they work on these websites that impact so many users, they need something on the back end to help manage the code. So learning that was tricky, but at the end of the day, I realized that the stuff going on inside that system, like the HTML and CSS that I was writing, were the same things that I learned in your class. So it wasn't too bad of a transition. Other things like accessibility are very important, especially for the University of Michigan and its users. So learning about accessibility and how to take this HTML that I was writing, the semantic code, and take it to the next level that makes it accessible by all of my users was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I think you took my class back before I was teaching HTML5, and so we didn't have a lot of those semantic tags. I didn't know if now you're using header and footer and nav and just some of the other tags we didn't have back then. So that makes me feel better that we're incorporating those now. Do you still have a personal portfolio?
Absolutely, yep. So my website as it exists today is actually just an iteration of what I built for your class for that final project. So that was really cool to have a foundation to work on and kind of turn my website into more of a portfolio showcase of the types of things I do in the industry now. And that came in especially handy when I applied for this new job because I was able to share some of my work with them before meeting them in person.
That's good. So do you code much? Is that what you're doing? Are you still coding, or are you doing, other things with people? You let other people do the code and you're managerial. I'm really curious what you do when you leave. So
so I'm still coding a little bit. I still think it's a lot of fun, and it's really important to be able to have that background in programming so I can speak the same language as the developers that I work with every day. Mainly when I'm doing development work, it's just for kind of rapid prototyping things. I do have full-time developers that I work with that do the heavy lifting when it comes to the coding behind the scenes. But I'm out on campus primarily, sitting down with my users and figuring out what they need from these systems that we're providing them. And then being able to come back to the office, take that feedback that I got from those users and translate it into things that the developers can work on. That's kind of that happy middle ground.
Okay. So you have a new job, though, right? Because like I mentioned, I just ran into you in the hallway, hadn't seen you around. What are you doing now?
Yeah, so my first job out of school, I was a user experience analyst. Okay. Now I'm a user experience designer. And the main difference there is working for this new department, the Digital Innovation Greenhouse. I'm working on tools that are much more flexible and agile, and we're working on them iteratively. So I'm able to go out to campus, get this feedback, and write cards for my developers to work on, and we can implement things quickly, gather feedback on it, and iterate on those changes. So I'm doing much more design work now, so I'm kind of picking up a lot of the visual design, the graphic design, trying to figure out which color palettes and typography and iconography works for the systems that we provide, and I think that's a new, interesting challenge for me.
That's great. It kind of brings up something that I hear a lot when we hear about, why are so many developers, men, which they are, and one of the reasons people give is, I don't want to do tech because I want to be out helping people. I want to be doing things with people. But we talked because you originally were a computer science major, correct? And you moved away. Do you feel that you get to interact with people and are you just doing tech, or do you feel you're doing more?
Oh, absolutely. I still do the tech stuff. I still consider myself a very technical person, but my main passion is working with people. And I think the reason I transitioned into the informatics major from the CS was because I still wanted to work with the human element. And I'm most passionate about helping people solve problems with technology. And so I felt that when I was just programming full-time, I really wasn't able to interact with the users like I knew that I should. And so there is some middle ground between those two fields, and I think that it's really important to be able to know what's going on behind the scenes with the code when I'm sitting across from users, because when they give me feedback, I might know what's actually capable, kind of in the back of my head, or what we're capable of doing, what's possible, because I understand our code base. But I don't necessarily need to be heads down programming all the time because, we've got people that do that full time.
Because who wants to be heads down programming all the time? There's times in life, but not forever for me.
Yep.
Well, that's great. I mean, this is what I was kind of hoping for is, I'm this face on the screen that have been lecturing to everybody, and it's different when you go out there in the real world. And I don't know if you were nervous about that first job. I found that I was, I'd done well in school, but that didn't necessarily mean I knew everything. And I like to encourage people to know that when they're in tech, they're never going to know everything. But it's these basic building blocks you talked about.
Of course, yep. It was definitely a learning curve starting that first job after school, but I just had to go in confident that, I had that background that I got from classes like yours, and I had the skill set. And really, after a couple months of settling into that new job, I felt like I really found a place for myself, improved myself, and you just got to take what you learned in school and start applying it and figure out how you need to tweak those skill sets to fit into different types of working environments. And it's really not as bad as it sounds.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I do want to thank Mike for this kind of last-minute interview. I hope you found it useful, and I hope it's going to inspire you to realize that whether you want to get deeply into tech or just really at a surface level, it can help you accomplish any type of job that you're going to go into. So thank you. Good morning, everybody. Apparently, I'm starting a new series called Hijacking My Students in the Hallway because I've just run into another student, Heidi Wong. And what I did is I noticed that she was working on some wireframes. So this is a great opportunity to, again, talk about some of the real-world applications of the things that you're learning in this class. So good morning, Heidi.
Good morning.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. So you were in my class last semester, correct?
Yes.
And one of the things I did as an assignment was ask everybody to sketch out their website before we started designing. What did you think was the importance of that assignment when you actually did it? And how much do you think your sketch really reflected what your final project looked like?
Well, I thought sketching was actually really helpful in sort of imagining the kind of experience I wanted like viewers to have on my website. Because at that point, I mean, it was very early in the semester, so I didn't really know how to do very much as far as coding went. But I could sketch, right? Like, you know, it's pretty simple to kind of think through how the front page would look and, you know, how the elements would be organized. So it was helpful to kind of just like lay that down on paper and then kind of ask the questions and kind of talk to people about how you would actually implement it in code.
All right, I have to say, I'm very impressed because when you say, oh, I can sketch, not a problem. Ask me to sketch something, and I feel like I want to vomit, all right? It's, for me, I'm a coder. I can create things. But that initial idea of drawing things out, it was paralyzing to me. So it's great to hear. I love to hear that that's what some people's strengths are, and I love that the people whose strengths complement mine are out there doing the things that I'm not that great at. So one of the things I just wanted to mention is I saw that you had these wire frames in front of you, and just how often do you use them in this job?
Pretty frequently, actually. So this is a new project I just got put on. It's called Policymaker, and it's basically this new tool they're designing for a professor at the School of Public Policy, and it's supposed to allow her to kind of facilitate. So every year, the Ford School does this in-class and simulation exercise, and currently they use C tools to kind of facilitate everything, and it's not really cut out for that kind of thing. It's sort of 3-day simulation where there's a lot of kind of communication and collaboration happening. And so they want to design this new tool that allow her to kind of facilitate that process and also allow the students to kind of more easily communicate and collaborate with one another. And I think, you know, when they introduced me to this project, I was like having a really hard time imagining everything that was happening because I have not participated in this process before. And so they kind of listed out all these tasks they wanted to accomplish. And I just like was not really getting it. So this was sort of a way for me to draw out the different tasks that would need to get accomplished. So like for me, like this is more of like a kind of putting myself in like their shoes and like imagining the different tasks they'd want to accomplish within the simulation exercise, and kind of just thinking through their journey through that experience. So then I had something on paper, and I was able to kind of show it to, you know, my boss and be like, does this look like the right sort of experience that you'd want this tool to accomplish? And then they can show it to the professor, and then we can kind of just like start that conversation.
Okay. So you have a page there. How many, for a project, do you have any certain feeling of, like, how many sketches do you end up with?
Not really. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm especially seasoned wireframer either. So, like, you know, this is one of the first projects where I've actually, like, started with the wireframes as a sort of thinking process.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have a sort of definitive answer to that. But I guess for me, like, I really like working through, like, a very iterative process where I'm kind of just like constantly drawing and showing it to people, and if it's like not right, then I can just scrap it and go to the next one. Because like that's one thing I sort of learned when I like started learning about how to prototype and wireframe is that like you don't want to have anything be too precious, you know.
That's a great idea, and I assume by that you mean I talk about it's so much better to draw it out by hand because you're willing to accept those changes while
Right.
you want to be flexible.
Right. And they're very abstract too, right? Like, I draw like a couple of boxes and they're not meant to be like, this is exactly how it looks. It's sort of like, here's the overall idea. Does this look right? If it does, then I can sort of move forward and like refine that further.
And so I'm curious, just because it seems you're really into the graphical, the drawing part of the sketching out. Are any of the HTML tags kind of in your brain as you're doing it, or are you really just looking at it as separate parts?
That's
Be
a
honest,
good
it's okay.
I mean, I think it was helpful. Like, it's helpful to definitely know how HTML works. So I feel like it's always sort of constantly in the back of my head now, but I wouldn't say it necessarily like informs how I think about the experience.
Which is really great, actually,
Yeah.
because if you're thinking about users, you should be thinking about users, not about code.
Right.
All right, well then, one last question for you, just because, I'm kind of curious. When actually, it's not even a question, it's a statement. Change it to that. When you did your sketch for the class,
Yeah.
were you thinking about interaction or were you thinking about layout?
I think I was just thinking about layout, actually. Because I think for me, at that point, I wasn't sure the sort of scope of interactions that were even, like, doable, I think I have a much better grasp of it now. But, like, at that point, I hadn't even, like, seen enough to know what was, like, possible. Like, I didn't know, like, if something was, like, a jQuery thing or a JavaScript thing or whatever. So I think I was just thinking of layout at that point.
And I think that's a really important idea, because when you're first beginning, when you
Yeah.
don't know much yet, you do what you can, and I think layout is what we focus on. And I'm just really glad to hear that, you've experienced this idea that wireframes are not just about layout; it's also really about that experience. So, thank you again for stopping and talking to us and sharing some of your work. Again, I'd just like to remind everyone that I really enjoy the fact when I see students, and I am fine if they are not doing anything at all that I taught them, because what I'm really proud of the fact is that they're following what they enjoy and they're using tech in their own ways to interact with people. So good luck. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk responsive design with Heather Newman from the University of Michigan. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Good, thanks. Let's go ahead and just jump right to it. What is your role at the University of Michigan?
I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the School of Information, which is one of the 19 schools and colleges at the university. So I oversee all of the school's public relations. I oversee all of its marketing. I oversee all of its communications, mostly for external audiences, folks outside the university, and I oversee all of the websites and design.
Okay, well, I'm tired just listening to everything you do. And I'm also a little bit in awe, because that sounds like it's a really big mix of both technical, non-technical, working with people, I assume a lot of independent work as well. Have you always been part of the tech field?
I started in technology as a kid, right? Like many of our students, I had a personal computer at home from age 10. I was online from age 12. But actually, much of my career has been focused on tech. So before I was in marketing and communications, I was a journalist. So I spent 20 years covering, and still do, for some outlets, cover technology and video games. And so that's been a large focus for me throughout my working career.
Okay. But let's talk specifically about the web page and the different things you do. When did responsive design or responsiveness and all these different platforms hit your radar as something that you needed to make sure that the UM site was on top of?
Really, from day one. So when I first started at the School of Information and the websites became sort of part of my purview, it was pretty obvious that the site that we had at the time had not been designed to be friendly with mobile devices. And yet our students, who are fairly advanced, much like the students for this course, I suspect, were already at that point carrying around smartphones. They were already using tablets, which are classified as mobile devices frequently for websites, and certainly were at that point in time. So the experience that they were getting if they tried to look at our site at that point, or any of our sites really, was not optimal. They were seeing sort of the big website shrunk down to a little tiny screen, and the outcome was that folks had a very difficult time using the site, and they would frequently abandon it as mobile visitors.
Oh, okay. So what was your approach? I mean, I've talked in the class about some of the different ways people can try to design from scratch, or use different sites for mobile versus a single site with different style sheets. How did you go about approaching your response?
Well, back in 2011, we initially approached setting up an entirely separate mobile site. It would still draw from some of the information and some of the articles that we had posted on the main site, but it would be structured entirely differently, sort of one of those M.dot addresses, right? So that people who came in on what we identified as a mobile platform would see that separate site that was tailored specifically for users of that platform. And the reason why we chose to do it at that point in time was that Google would give preferential search results to people who had specific mobile websites or mobile versions of their websites. So if you had somebody who was searching for you on Google and you had an M.dot style website, that would pull up higher up in the search results than if you had a normal website that had a more responsive design. Google's gotten a lot more sophisticated since then, so that's no longer an issue. And what we discovered was that it was incredibly difficult to try and feed a good amount of information into a mobile website without confusing or frustrating people who knew that information was available on the desktop site, but either couldn't get to it in the same way or they couldn't see everything that they could on the desktop site. And there was no good way for us to signpost to say, this is the point where you really need to go to the desktop to see what you're going to see. So we actually abandoned those plans even before fully implementing the site.
Okay, that must have been painful. I know that
yes.
As a programmer, I like the students to know that sometimes you just have to chuck out everything you've done so far, and it can be really painful for people to do that. And it's great to hear that that's not a failure. That's just web design. That's just technology is going back and doing it again. So now you use a more sophisticated approach. But still, after you rolled out, the latest site, are there things that ever surprise you now or surprised you when you had these sites up?
Well, and we have a series of sites, right? We have the main site for the school, but we also have sub-sites that address some of our specific programs, especially those that are shared with other schools and colleges on campus. So we've had the opportunity to kind of redesign with mobile in mind in a number of places, and it continually surprises me what people want to do. So as a school at the university, for example, you can start your application for the university via our website. And it stuns me every year to discover how many students want to begin their application to grad school using their phones, knowing that I'm probably not going to write my essay on my phone, right? But I want to be able to start my application and in a way that is easy for me to begin. So at least I can get a sense of, these are the things that are going to be required to apply. These are the things that I can start to ruminate about, do I need to include this in my position statement or my essay? And so we needed to support that as part of our mobile approach. And at this point, all of our websites, I believe, are mobile first in the sense that our students, large percentages of our students and prospective students come in using mobile platforms, whether they're smaller form factor tablets or whether they're just smartphones. But in either case, that's the form factor that we design for now. And the desktop is, I guess, an additional version that expands on that.
Okay, great. So these are exactly the kind of things that I love to hear about because it's so different when you're out there in the real world and you're developing these things and you're dealing with failure. One of the things I always hear from prospective employees is teach the students how to fail. And I was like, I can't. There are teacher evaluations. So I guess my question for you, probably my final question right now is, I know that you hire a lot of developers and not just developers, but other people who you expect to have some level of technology knowledge or, understanding of HTML. For people who are not computer science majors, people who are not necessarily coming in with a degree that's, in design or technology specifically, what kind of things do you look for, just across the board, for when you're hiring people to work as part of your group? Really new people, kind of that first entry-level job.
I think that a lot of, especially for that kind of entry-level position, what you're looking for is folks who have taken an initiative to learn things on their own, right? Because they're not necessarily going to have the 20 years of job experience to build up progressively responsible positions, that relate to technology or to, the websites. But if they can demonstrate that they've had an interest for a while in a particular area, that they're reading articles journal articles, news stories that relate to developments in the field, that they're doing things like this class, right, to kind of advance their own knowledge. It's an indication that they have an active interest and that they have the willingness to kind of consume information in that field. To be honest, web design changes on a daily basis, right? Every day there is something new that comes in. So having somebody who has a full suite of technical skills up front is great. But if that person can't adapt and can't change those skills as they move on, then, 10 years from now, you're going to end up with somebody who is a whiz at cold fusion programming, and can put together like the best site based on frames you've ever seen. But they're not going to be somebody that can adapt and roll with the new tech. So a lot of folks, when responsive design became such an important priority, for website design, a lot of people were used to designing for the desktop. They wanted everything to be pixel perfect. They wanted everything to look, exactly the same on every screen and, to be like infinitely customizable, right, and controllable. And some of those people had difficulty adapting. So the more you can prove to me that you have the ability to roll with those punches as they come, and the more that you can prove that you're excited about the idea of learning new things and applying them, the more likely I am to consider your application.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate all your input today. And I hope that you've also gained something from this, whether it's understanding that, yes, it's okay and expected to fail, or really that any little thing you can do to get yourself more engaged in tech is going to help you in all these different fields. So thank you very much. Hi everyone, welcome to the final project. One of the things that you are going to do in this project is demonstrate your ability to write media queries for both sizes and accessibility. First thing you're going to do is you're going to replace all the images that I've given you with your own images. Second, you're going to add some content in the first and second paragraph so that people can know kind of what your page is about and anything you'd like them to know. It's very important that you do not remove the link at the very bottom of the page. Let me scroll down here. The jump to top link. Make sure you leave this because one of the media queries you're going to write is going to be to turn on and off that scroll. So let's begin. Your first step, once you've changed the images, is to go into your CSS and change this grid div right here so that it's using a 1-column grid with a 10 pixel gap between the rows and columns. You can kind of see it just a little bit here when I have the overview. You can see there's a little pink line between each of them. But it's very straightforward. You're just going to add styling for that grid class to be a 1-column grid. The next step is to write your first media query that will be triggered at 772 pixels. Let's resize the screen. In this case, as you can see as I resize it, it'll look a little bit different depending upon what images you're using. However, the important thing to notice is that it is your responsibility to change the grid to be 2 columns now once we hit 772 pixels. I would also like you to change the border radius of the figures so that they now have this circular shape instead of square. And finally, as we scroll down, I want your last image, image number 9, to take up both columns. All right? As I'm focused here, you can see that little dotted line separating the columns, that's our 10 pixel gap. Your last image, right? Don't hard code it necessarily to the 9th one. Your last image should take up both columns. Let's go to the next media query trigger point, and that will be at 992 pixels. In this case, I've left my grid alone. It's still a 2-column grid. But let's jump up here to the top. And you will see that now every third image takes up both columns. All right? So in your media query, you need to figure out, 1, how to get rid of the border radius completely. Notice that all the pictures are now square. And 2, how can you change every third image so that it takes up both columns? Those are the 2 media queries that we're going to do that involve the screen size. But you have 2 more media queries to write after that. First, let's talk about this jump to main content at the bottom. If you notice, when I click on it, it has a scrolling effect back to the top. That is because in the starter code, I have animation, scroll behavior, smooth. We want to turn that off when people have prefers reduce motion on. Let me show you an example. So I just took a moment to turn on prefers reduce motion in my accessibility options. So now when I scroll to the bottom of the page, and this time when I click on jump to the top, you can see it's an immediate jump. That scrolling is gone to help reduce the amount of visual disorientation that some people might experience. The final media query that you're going to write will address the different color schemes that people might choose. My assumption is that people were using the light color scheme. However, if in their preferences they switch to the dark color scheme, your page should update appropriately by using a dark background with kind of a lighter color. So let's take a look. Here's the page when they have the dark color scheme. Notice the text around red, orange, yellow, etc. And these are the colors when they're in the light color scheme. All right. I've also changed the border slightly just to have it black, to have it pop out just a little bit more. That's it. You'll be writing 4 media queries in total. One with a trigger point at 772 pixels, one with a trigger point at 992 pixels, a media query for prefers reduce motion, and a media query for prefers color scheme. Don't worry about the exact colors you may use or even getting that exact number correctly. Always start getting one thing done first and moving on to the next, and be sure to use the message boards to give and receive help on this project. Good luck! Hi everyone! Congratulations on finishing the class. Let's talk about some of the things we've covered. Of course, you've been able to write basic CSS rules for styling, and maybe even utilize the tools for checking that CSS, inspect element, wave, etc. But more importantly, hopefully you are comfortable using fluid measurements now. When I go to your page, I don't expect to see things like 100 pixels or 300 pixels. You're using percents, VW, and VH. You can also write media queries for different screen sizes. You know that things should look different and act different on mobile screens versus laptops for people who have prefers reduce motion on and those who do not. Speaking of which, you're able to write rules to facilitate accessibility with motion and color scheme preferences. You can discuss the importance of that mobile-first paradigm, how we really want to think about how can we add as the screen gets bigger rather than take away as it gets smaller. And maybe you even understand a little bit about the grid system of Bootstrap. So what's next for you? You can always practice, right? The great thing about CSS is that there's a million different colors, a million different layouts, and a lot of different screen sizes that you can play with. If you're really interested in the programming aspect, you can look into front-end frameworks. Some of the most popular include React and Angular. They are definitely more complicated than Bootstrap, but if it's something that interests you, it's definitely worth it. You might decide to explore accessibility in more depth. Maybe that's something that you would like to bring to your existing team projects, or something that you would like to completely change your career and follow as well. But really, I'm hoping you're using your knowledge to bring together people from different groups who have their specializations, and you can make the best project possible for the widest audience. But really, what you should do is take a moment and just be proud of yourself, all right? It is really easy to start something and not finish it. Heck, even if you didn't even do all the homeworks and you've just been following the videos, great job. I'm proud of you for sticking with it and showing an interest in kind of expanding the different knowledge that you have about the web. Every little bit helps, and I appreciate that you've taken the time to join us. Again, thank you.